Post-production, they say, is the final rewrite of the story. It's taking those materials that you've worked so hard on, rearranging them, ordering them, and then present it to the audience.
Every season, I try, in my role as visual effects producer, to anticipate what's coming, and every season there is more work and more sophistication. Season 5 really was huge. It was epic.
In a show like Game of Thrones, anything goes. There's no boundaries.
Filmmaking has always been a world where you push the envelope of things, either visually or technically. And with this show, that definitely was the sense, and failure wasn't an option because it had to get done.
What we do here is just something people don't know about for the most part. It's fake. Everything's faked here.
That's a wrap for the season.
My responsibility begins when the image hits the sensor. So I oversee the editorial workflow and the editors, sound department, music department, visual effects, and take care of delivering the show to the studio. The visual effects team is the first of our post-production teams to join the show. I mean, really, they're a production department and a post-production department because they work throughout the process. Our dailies department then starts about 2 weeks before production begins, when we're shooting camera tests, we're shooting makeup tests, we're shooting tests of any of the new costumes or any of the new sets if we can. Picture editors then start the day of production, and then we begin to bring on the sound team. About 8 weeks into post, we open up our mix stage. Digital post-production, it's like building a house. You have the plan, you have the foundation, you have the framing, except everything after the framing, rather than doing it in order as you should, you have to do it all at the same time.
The success of Game of Thrones has everything to do with the collaboration that it is. It is an enormously collaborative effort. We all work together very closely because every department overlaps.
Game of Thrones is unusual because we have so many directors of photography. Most television series would have 1, maybe 2 DPs. But since we're so big and since we're shooting with 2 full units all the time, we have as many as 5 directors of photography per season.
It's impossible to know how much they're going to shoot in a season. Different directors, different DP scenes, different visual effects heavy scenes. We overestimate. It's right around the 400 to 500 hour mark.
We have 2 units shooting in Belfast all the time, or sometimes 1 unit in Belfast and 1 unit overseas. And our directors and director of photography and editors all need that material. Our dailies team works really hard to, as quickly as they can, get the material from set. Color it so it matches or loosely matches what the show is going to look like and what the final look might be based on notes they get from our cinematographers. And then hand that footage off both to the editors and post it for the other producers as well as the studio.
We try to anticipate what they're going to shoot out on the road. And then from there, we make sure wherever we go, we have a high-speed internet connection.
It's amazing. When we were shooting in Iceland in season 2, we were up on a glacier. We were 7 hours away from the nearest airport, if you could even get there because of weather. And yet with the internet, we had a dedicated 50 meg line that came into a rescue station. And within 4 hours of when something was shot up on a glacier in a blizzard in Iceland, that material was available for editors in Belfast, and about an hour later, available for the studio in Los Angeles.
We pick these locations, and they look amazing, but they are tough locations because we rely on technology, and technology hates stuff like that. Hard drives don't like getting wet, and in places like Magamoran, that's not an option. You know, it has to deal with mud and horizontal rain and all the fun things that we get in Northern Ireland.
When they actually make a shot on set, they have monitors and they can look at it and it looks colored and looks pretty and nice, but what's actually captured there on the hard drive looks kind of gray and flat, which is called log space. It's a trick that we use to make sure that later on when we do our final color, all of the data is preserved.
It looks very flat, very neutral. And the reason we do that is because with digital, once you do 100% of anything, you're clipping out. Same sense with audio. If you have pure red or pure black or pure white, you don't have room in the sensor for any other information. So we have a very flat, neutral, negative we deal with.
Those hard drives then travel to the editing room. We use 3 picture editors. Dailies flow in every night, and they have that material the very next morning.
I suppose it's one big organizational thing for me to do, which is just manage all the material and know that I've seen it and just get to know it, basically. You get all this great material, so you try and put as many great shots in as you can, and then, you know, you start correcting yourself and reducing it down to what it should be.
There's very much an authorial voice to what picture editors do. Each season I look at the scripts and I look at the outline and think about, given the content of each episode, which editor would be the best choice for that.
My cut is the script's ordered version of the episode, so everything they've shot in sequence from 1 through to whatever, how many scenes without a word of dialogue cut out, as the director looked like they intended to shoot it. And that is stage 1 of the process. And then you'll sort of take a look at that and see where you can improve it, and then sit down with the director, and that's when you start working together.
The editorial process has always fascinated me. You see the material roll in, and you often can look at, or you do look at dailies, and you can tell, oh, I can tell the director is thinking he'll start with this shot, then he'll go to that, and he has this coverage, and then that's the out. But then as the director and editor work further on it and they tighten things up, suddenly what they thought was the intention of the scene that you'd reach at the end, you reach it in the middle.
Sometimes I just look at it and I'll just see a take that's really great, and I just know that the whole scene builds around that. Other times I have a mountain of material and I'm not sure what to do with it, so I just follow the script and see who's supposed to be saying something, and then it all falls into place. Those dragon sequences are obviously prevised with animations, so we know how they're going to work.
Previs is a really valuable tool for the producers and for the director to work out in advance how the sequence is going to play. You don't want to show up on the set and figure it out when you're standing around with a crew of 200 and 500 extras.
The first thing I do when I read the summary any season is count giants, I count dragons, I count armies, I count whites, and I prioritize those in my head, and those are sort of fuel the engine of excitement.
The most important thing that visual effects can bring to any project is scope, to create a wider vista than the camera can capture, than the production designer can physically create in any world. You could never have 10,000 extras. You could never have an environment dressed that broadly. And so with visual effects, we'll use as many realistic and organic elements as we can. We shoot every kind of plate that we can shoot in any kind of setting we can think of to make a big shot as realistic as possible.
The creativity is always balanced by how are we going to do it, how much time do we have, and how can we move a camera in a fairly simple way, but when you put enough of those shots together, it becomes something amazing.
Season 5 has 1,557 visual effects shots and then about 300 production fixes. So 1,857 shots, which is probably the equivalent of a large action superhero movie. One of the great things about visual effects is we're one of the first people in and we're one of the last people out to close the door. We're involved in reading the scripts as they're coming off the line and doing breakdowns and figuring out the details of how you get a 50-foot dragon blasting fire at a crowd of Sons of Harpy.
We knew the arena was going to be big. We knew that it was going to be many times bigger than any location that we could find. We knew the dragons were going to be twice as big as we've seen them in the past, especially Drogon, who's 20% larger than the other two.
The visual effects for Season 5 were a bit more complex than they had been in the past, and so we needed to bring some tools to the table that we hadn't used before. We had a Techno-Dolly, which is a remote-controlled camera crane that moves along on a track and can lift up and dolly and pan around in a way that most camera cranes do, only this was robotic. It can be programmed for playing the part of the dragon when it needed to breathe fire.
You can actually do almost anything in a computer today. You just don't want to. You can use CG flame, but if you can photograph flame, you're going to be a lot better off. It's going to look more integrated, the light is going to bounce around on the set in a more natural way, and it's going to make the rest of the visual effects easier to make photoreal and 100% successful. I'm constantly amazed at how good the show looks. The final picture work on the show comes together in the colorist suite.
A final colorist takes all the raw footage that is shot for months with different crews, different cinematographers, and digitally create what the cinematographers and the producers want to visually see at the end. My job as a final colorist is basically the same as it's been for 100 years in film. We just have a lot more sophisticated tools than they used to have in the film arena, and we can make the footage look like anything. Some of the challenges on my end of the job is putting together all the material that's shot very rapidly. There's not a lot of time on set. Weather changes, it can go from direct sunlight to rain, and making all of those shots seamlessly come together like it was all shot at one time. It could have been shot over days.
Each of the kingdoms has a slightly different look, a slightly different hue to it. King's Landing is a little more golden. North of the Wall and up by Castle Black are cooler. Essos is a little more yellow. We do everything we can to help people know where they are right away. And whether you're conscious of those things or not, it's a very, very important part of what we all do. And we really work hard on our transitions. How do you transition from one scene to the next? Is it a pre-lap? Is it a post-lap? Is it music?
Music plays a very important role. It can guide the viewer and then mislead a viewer and really point you in the direction that you want.
Ramin Djawadi is spectacular at the kind of thematic work for the characters and for the families. And that's exactly what the show needs.
I think each season is a new challenge in itself. On the one hand, the nice thing is obviously that the overall sound is established. Obviously, we have the main theme, and then we have all the other themes that are in existence so far for the different families and so on. So that's a great thing. The hard thing now is that to find the balance, because you want to hear the Lannister theme, you want to hear the Stark theme, you want to hear the main theme, but then you also want something new, just how the show develops. So I feel each season I need to look at it and go, okay, I want to make sure that the core of the music stays the same, and we stay true to Game of Thrones, what Game of Thrones has become now musically, but also then develop it further. All the themes have sort of evolved as different characters die off, I guess. It's, like there's others still remaining, so the themes live on with the families. And it's been an interesting journey musically as well to follow the remaining characters of the family and see where their journey takes us, and also then musically what that means. For example, how the Stark theme actually gets darker in cases of Arya.
Early on, when we first sit down with Ramin, we talk about what the overarching arc for the season's going to be and what new elements there might be, so that Ramin knows, for example, in season 5, that Cersei, she's got an interesting arc.
For the Sparrows, they're this religious, these fundamentalists. So we've been using a little bit of choir, but again, we didn't want to go too much into that typical religious music and then choir. So there's some of that, a little bit of that chanting material, but it's mainly violin-based. Actually, I'm using a hurdy-gurdy, which is sort of a similar instrument to violin, but you kind of wind it up and it's fretted like a violin, and you play it, and it has this very raw sound that I thought was pretty cool.
Get your hands off me! Sir Loras of House Tyrell, you have broken the laws of gods and men. Who do you think you are? Justice.
And for the Harpies, they have a little bit of an ethnic feel, but because they're wearing masks, so we actually thought it would be interesting to have whispers for them. So it just gives us that creepy feel. So whenever we see, you don't see their faces, it's like a mysterious thing. So that's kind of their new sound. David and Dan are very good with kind of looking ahead of where the story is taking us, and then we usually, when there's new characters and new themes to be done, we discuss and make sure that whatever I write can open up to whatever needs to be. Does it need to become very powerful at some point, or darker, or lighter? So whatever theme we planned, we have to make sure that it's written in a way that it can be modulated to what we need.
Season over season, as the characters have rolled out and the new storylines have rolled out, Ramin has just broadened his palette with more instruments, more added sounds.
When I saw the guys today, I was just joking that there's probably not a single instrument that we're not using in this show. I mean, it's so widespread with all these different characters and worlds. I don't know myself sometimes how I write some of the music. Other than that, I'm just a little kid in a candy store that is allowed to sit in a room and come up with melodies and instruments to use and play and arrange, and it's absolutely amazing.
The sound process begins on set when your production sound mixer and his team do absolutely everything they can to record good dialogue. So much of performance, so much of an actor's work is their voice. And it's really important that you try to record it as cleanly and as well as you can.
Stannis Baratheon is coming, his whole army.
We often find that the quality of the recording either has too much background noise or too much costume noise on it, and it has to be re-recorded.
Stannis Baratheon is coming.
ADR is automated dialogue replacement. Means that it's the material that needs re-recording, either because on location there's been sound problems, anything from lighting noise, aeroplanes overhead, car passes at inappropriate moments. All of the background characters you see on the streets, in the marketplaces, on the ships, and in all the battles, we do everybody. Everyone gets re-recorded.
Basically, you bring your cast in to an ADR studio, which is a recording studio, and you put the picture up on the wall, and they go along and they do their best to get back to where they were on the day and mimic their performance.
Particularly action sequences, almost everything is re-recorded. It has to be. The clangs of the swords, that noise gets in the way of the efforts, so everything gets rebuilt.
Film sets need to be quiet places. Even if there's a lot of action going on and a lot of people screaming and running around, or talking in a restaurant, or talking in the background of a shot, those actors usually aren't saying anything. And later in the process, you bring in a group of actors called a loop group, and they'll go through an episode and make the voices and put their voice in the mouths of all those people.
Move down!
Here, take this, sit down!
The cast that we use to do this work are professional actors. They're not extras. It's their talent that adds so much to this show. It's their ability to interpret and provide these voices. And really, they do sacrifice their voices. Some of these shouty scenes, they're very tired when they leave this room. One of the problems with recording group and getting it to feel real, we're in a studio environment, so trying to get sort of physicality into the voice. Well, obviously we're on set and we're running past and we're actually doing it. What we'll do is, for individuals running, we'll actually get them to move hips, knees, shoulders. And then if we've got big crowds of people gathering where they're kind of mobbing and pushing through, what we've sort of developed the technique is we'll get them to actually push through, and then the voices move. So the one that was up front at the start is now going to the side and to the back and being recycled. They can change their accent, they can change the pitch, and just keep this kind of pushing and shoving through.
Open the gates!
Let me in!
The gates!
Any time you have a show that's pre-electricity, you have a lot of sound challenges, but you also have a tremendous amount of sound possibilities. Because you can't just turn up the New York City traffic in the background if you have a sound issue. All you have are natural elements. So we rely a lot on our Foley.
We are basically the organic element of the sound design process. This is my environment. My tools of trade, very dangerous, sharp objects. Every texture you can think of. We have mud, gravel, various types of dirt, many different types of surfaces. We cover everybody's footsteps. Most shows that I work on, maybe 6 pairs of shoes for principal characters. This one, 15. And that's just principals. So the amount of shoes that we go through every day is incredible. Then we go through and we get all of the hand props. So a lot of the quiet scenes, the pouring the wine, the chairs, all those scenes, we cover everything. Down here in the animal environment, I had put these together, some PVC pipe with these little handles that I use for goats and some of the other little hoofed animals. But for the horses, had these made.
All of the look is so rich, the costumes are so rich, the sets are so rich, that the final layer of frosting on the richness of those people's great work really is in the Foley and the sound design. Paula Fairfield is our sound designer. She does the dragons, she does the wolves, she does the White Walkers and the ambiances that are unusual.
It's all about helping to tell the story. It has to be authentic and organic to the story, and yet wow people every time.
I always encourage her to make it weird, because, you know what, I mean, we've all seen shows where the dragon roars. We know the dragon's gonna roar. I'm kind of interested in how the rest of the stuff brings it to life.
I'll come up with something, I'll be so proud of it, and he'll always say, okay, well, that's interesting. Could you do something a little more unusual? You know, he always pushes one step farther, and it's great. I create a structure, and then you hang all the other stuff on, and the other stuff is the stuff that really brings it to life. So even in the dragons, the vocals, I mean, that's one thing, but it's one of many. You know, we have the skin movement and the wings and all that stuff, which makes it all very visceral and tactile. I'm always looking for just the kind of odd sound, you know? I use dogs, dolphins, pigs, seals, some birds, you know, whatever. I mean, sometimes I'll throw my own voice in just as a bridge to something.
Game of Thrones lives in a world that doesn't really exist, so we do have to dig into the imagination quite a bit to try and not even just for the obvious dragons and White Walkers and all that, but just the sounds of the environment.
All of the sounds are laid out and come together on the mix stage. They take the sound effects and the Foley and the footsteps and the winds and the dialogue, the ADR and the music, and they mix it all together and they create the sound world of what is the show.
This show, especially certain episodes, have a ton of elements in it. You get down to it, adding in music, you know, we're talking 600 tracks of stuff to get through on the mixing stage. This is one of those projects where, you know, it's definitely taught me, okay, there's overwhelming stuff, but okay, piece by piece, you know, okay, let's concentrate on this one detail. Done, let's concentrate on the next detail. And then once you get all those details, put them together, see how they work, and then start, you know, manipulating it from there.
Ideally, on what is the last real day of post-production for that episode, David and Dan and our HBO executives come in and we sit and watch the show. It's a big, glorious room, and we watch it like a movie. And then the next time everybody sees it, it is on air.
What's really amazing with this show, and it's, you know, it's set in this world that is not very technical, it's not modern, but the amount of modern resources that go into the show is actually really amazing. And you look at, you know, we take these very complex computers with very sensitive sensors and really, you know, beautiful pieces of glass, you know, that makes up our lenses, and we capture this world that doesn't really exist. And then we go through all these processes of audio, visual, to sculpt this vision of make-believe and deliver something that's believable. And that's the fun. That's the, you know, I still get to be a fan at the end of the day.
I love how much everybody loves it, you know? And when people just get so excited. It's a joy to work on, and it's a double joy when people just are so thrilled, and it's like, oh, I love this scene, or I just love that. I love that people get lost in it for a little bit.
I think what I feel is the most rewarding part of my job is being able to work on what I think is the best show on television. And when it starts airing on Sunday, sitting back on the couch with my wife and watching it through her eyes.
We all do our best to continue to make the show better. Can we get one more visual effects note in? Can we get that music cue exactly right? Can we get that mix a little bit better? Can we get that ADR line to fit in a little bit better? In visual effects terms, they have something called a CBB, which stands for could be better. It means good enough. We never have those.
It just seems almost like an unwritten contract that we have with the people watching the show, that things will keep growing, and the complexity of the biggest set pieces especially has grown tremendously.
When you look at the giant set pieces in the show to date, most of them have been from the books, and Hardhome is mentioned in the books. We know that something terrible happened there, but we don't know what happened. So this was an opportunity to show the audience something that is going to be fresh for everyone, whether you're a book reader or not a book reader. This is stuff that no one has seen.
You trust me, Jon Snow? Does that make me a fool? We're fools together now.
Production-wise, Thrones always felt massive to me from the start, and Hardhome, it feels bigger in VFX, CGI, and bigger in scale than the whole of Episode 9 last year.
It's amazing, it's huge, and it's extremely ambitious, and it costs a hell of a lot of money. And it's all for the fans.
It is through everybody having that same attitude of how can we succeed?
It is very much an all-hands-on-deck situation.
It's very different from the other battles we've seen before, and it's way harder to shoot. We didn't know how big it was going to be until we actually got into pre-production with it.
Whenever I read anything that's like a big battle sequences, you've got to treat it the same as you treat a dramatic scene. Is like, what's the story, whose story is it, whose point of view is it? So kind of attacked it full force. I went away and I storyboarded for about 3 weeks, and I storyboarded the entire sequence as written originally, which was huge, which was probably 2 or 3 times as big as it is now as the thing we actually shot.
Initially, the scene was written even bigger than it was, and it just got to the point where we were up against it because we wanted to get everything and we weren't sure how we were going to do it.
It suddenly became apparent that there was a whole section of it that didn't need to be there, that was there because we were playing to the idea of a battle. And that made me realize that what I was really interested in what the story was and what the thread was, is it wasn't a battle, it was a massacre.
It's not like the other battle scenes we've had, whether at Castle Black or Blackwater, where you've got 2 opposing armies coming together. Really, you've got the army of the dead coming and the wildlings putting up resistance for as long as they can and then getting massacred. And so it doesn't have the feel of a battle so much as a horror movie sequence.
If you look at it as a massacre and you don't look at it as a battle, it changes all sorts of things. And then from that, the idea came out, well, what if we also restricted the point of view? What if we only told it from just the main character's point of view, and namely from Jon's point of view, because it's Jon's story in the end. And so that's where the idea of the stockade fence came in.
We were all horror movie fans, and once he mentioned it, we all had this instinctive, immediate reaction that the thing that's on the other side of the door that you can't see is always going to be more terrifying than something you see in some giant sweeping helicopter shot.
The whites come to the fence, you hear it all, it's all about sound design, it's all about the reactions on our whites' faces, but it's not really something you see. You just catch these glimpses of them to start with, and we hold off from seeing the monster for as long as possible. So now the monster behind the door, the massacre, the point of view, the restrictive viewing, all of those things started to make sense, and they coalesced into what ended up being Hardhome. We had something that was shootable, and now we had something that utilised our limitations as strengths instead of weaknesses.
It's difficult to build a large-scale settlement that looks old and lived in and worn down by the elements. One of our most successful sets was Castle Black, and it served us really well over the years. It is so successful because it has that 360-degree lived-in quality.
This set is built in the same area as Castle Black is, and so when I first came here, we went to see Castle Black, and it's a huge set. It's enormous, and I was in awe of the size of this set and the size of the pieces of timber and everything. And I looked below, and there was this set that was about 60 or 70 times larger directly below it,